Hello and welcome, folks, to the Scrum Call. This episode is number 6. Last time we covered the Agile principles. If there are any doubts on that, please feel free to write to me or ask any specific questions. I would love to answer them. Today we will be covering the Agile framework and the inverted triangle. There are no blockers as of now. What is the Agile framework? Let me be specific. What is the Agile Scrum framework? Agile is a methodology. It is a way to do something. A framework puts in the basic process around how something will be achieved in a certain manner. That is a framework. Scrum is one of the frameworks. Kanban is another popular framework. For the purpose of this podcast, we will be sticking to Agile Scrum framework. Getting right to it, the process is fairly simple, easy to understand, but very difficult to implement and maintain. And I'll come to why it is difficult. Generally, Agile Scrum is quite easy to actually understand and figure out and learn, but implementing and maintaining it is where the fun begins. Alright, so let's begin with the Agile Scrum framework. It all begins with two groups. One group is your end users, the business, the customer, basically the people who are giving you the requirements. They have a business problem, a business issue that needs to be solved, and they are the ones who will voice out what they want. The next group is a group of product owners. Now, for the sake of simplicity, we'll just take the example of one simple team, right? So in this team, we have one product owner. The product owner is the person who will interact with the customer. He will or she will voice the sentiments, the requirements, the pain points of the customer, representative of the customer. That is a product owner. Why product owner? I'll come to it. Now, the product owner will sit with the business or the client customer and understand what and all they need, and then he or she will start creating stories, user stories. It would typically have a very simple language, like as a user I should be able to log in the first time and not be asked to log in every other time I open the browser window, for example. Now this person will start creating all of these stories, and each story is a unique piece of requirement. Now the login page itself may have 10-15 stories depending on how simple or complicated it might be, but it's a product owner's job to figure out what is a unique unit of work, and slowly this person will build up a product backlog of requirements, which is basically nothing but the voice of the customer. Once this is done, and he or she will have to prioritize it. Remember, in one of the principles we spoke about delivering the best value to the customer. Well, that is where the product owner has to figure out what is the set of stories which will give the highest value to the customer, and he or she will prioritize a product backlog. Let's say there are 50 stories. Out of those 50 stories, the product backlog will be prioritized with the topmost, most valuable thing that the customer needs right away will be on the very top, and so on. Once the product backlog is ready, that's when the product owner should ideally sync up with the Scrum Master, saying that, hey, our sprint planning is coming up. Here's a product backlog which is ready. Let's bring this up in our sprint planning, and we will slot it in for the next upcoming sprint. In this case, when the sprint planning happens, and don't worry about thinking what is sprint planning and all these things, I will get into the depths of all those too. When the sprint planning happens, the product owner, the Scrum Master, along with the development team, that is a team of developers who write code, it could include your QA as well, all people within your team who are going to achieve this delivery. They all come together and they will start picking out stories out of the product backlog. Now that's a larger pool of work, right? It does not mean that entire larger pool of work has to finish in one sprint. No, we go in small iterations. of 2 weeks to up to a month, right? Assuming this team has a sprint timeline of 2 weeks. So each sprint lasts for 2 weeks time basically. In that sprint planning, along with the Scrum Master, the team will decide, okay, the most prioritized one is this, and then we'll start, pulling that in, and then, there'll be a lot of back and forth. It's a planning meeting basically, right? So you sit and decide, okay, what can we pull into this sprint? What can be achieved? And it's a very dynamic meeting. Many times some stories may not be pulled in even if it is prioritized, because there is probably more questions on that. Maybe there is, the story is too big probably. It could be many things, it is always dynamic. It is never black and white. There's a lot of gray. And that is a good thing, because that means that the product owner needs to refine it further. We'll come to refinement too. Now the sprint planning happens. The sprint planning will result in something called the sprint backlog. So we have a product backlog, which is a larger pool of work. Then we have a sprint backlog, which is a smaller pool of work, which is pulled in only for that one sprint of 2 weeks, where the team will decide what is it that they can take to realistically achieve and give out a potentially shippable product by the end of those 2 weeks time. Once that happens, the sprint begins. And when the sprint begins, every single day we have a Scrum Call. Within the sprint time frame itself, we may do a 1 or 2 meetings of sprint of refinement, wherein the product owner would come back and say, okay, we have some new stories that we need to refine, and then we may have that meeting. And then towards the end of the sprint, we would be having our sprint retrospective, our sprint review, within which we will also do a demo of what we have achieved. And out of all of that, we will have some feedback that will again become added material for the product owner to work on and create his product backlog. So the product backlog is a very, dynamic and living, set of work. It is fueled by the customer's requirements and also fueled by the feedback that comes in, not only from the customer, but it could also come from the team, where they might say that, hey, there was some set of stories that were a little too complicated, or the requirement was slightly not clear, or because of some external dependency, some new thing got added to it, and we may have to take care of it in the next one. So there's a lot of dynamism that happens over here. And if you notice, the entire framework has one very key thing built into it, and that is transparency. There is clear visibility into what is the larger pool of work that the customer wants. The entire team can look at it. When we start planning the sprint, we will have the flexibility to pick and choose what we realistically can actually do, and we can even question and do a pushback, saying that, hey, this doesn't make sense, let's clarify with the customer. And if required, we can have a meeting of the customer along with the product owner, Scrum Master, and the development team to clarify things. So there's transparency everywhere. You're not being things are not being pushed down your throat, right? So there is transparency everywhere. Even during the sprint, you have a refinement wherein you can talk about upcoming stories which are not there in the product backlog. So you have visibility into work which is going to come to you in the future also. And then in the Scrum Call, you are talking about what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? Are there any impediments, any blockers that you need help with, or you want to call out with, where the Scrum Master may have to step in and help remove all of those. And then you have a point in time where towards the end of the sprint, you review the entire sprint, you review the work, you demo the work, and then you do a retrospective where you talk about how was the overall sprint, how did it go, what did we learn, what can we start doing, stop doing, and whatnot. So there is feedback also built into it. And overall, there is an aspect of transparency and feedback, and at the same time taking everybody as a partner here, right? The team is empowered to decide what it can take, what it can really, realistically deliver. There is an aspect where you can interact not just with the product owner, but you can even go down to the customer also and have a chat with them and figure things out. So there is a lot of flexibility built over here, all geared to ensure that by the end of this, we are delighting the customer. And I love this word, delighting the customer, because it really is an attempt towards ensuring that the customer gets not just what they want, but more than what they actually asked for. Because along the way, and anyone who's worked in waterfall will realize, along the way, the more you show things to the customer, the more things tend to change. The scope changes. And the customer themselves may realize that, hey, maybe there's something better that can be achieved than what they might have thought, based on the kind of, sprint review, the demos that they might see. So the customer is constantly shown what they can get, what they are getting, and they can, always pick and choose or refine themselves and make a better product. Which brings me to the next point of this particular episode, and that is the inverted triangle. That's a very important one. All right. Now, the inverted management triangle. There is one triangle which is like a typical pyramid. You have a broader base, and then as it goes up, it narrows up to a point. At the top portion of it, you have scope, which is fixed, right? In waterfall, the scope is fixed. You know exactly what needs to be done, and you start trying to achieve exactly that. And you start running into trouble when there is scope creep, or when the scope begins to change, or when requirements have to change because of several factors. And that's when you run into a problem. And that is where your cost and schedule tends to become variable. If you have to achieve the scope and you are running into all sorts of issues, well, put in some more money, get some more new technology, or get some more people, or let's change the timeline a little bit. Those issues come in. In Agile, the same pyramid is now inverted. Now on the fixed and broader side, you have schedule and teams. We don't change our schedule. If the customer says by the end of the year we need this, it's our job to ensure by the end of the year we help the customer get what they want. The second thing that should not change is teams. And I'll explain why teams should not change. But teams is one of the things that also remains the same. Team, when I say, your Scrum Master, Product Owner, your developers, QA, your development team basically. The thing that can vary is scope. Scope creep, changing scope is welcomed in Agile, right? And I just explained in the framework, right, that there is feedback that comes in. A lot of people may realize that, maybe we need to do something different, or can we add this more? Scope is variable. We can change the scope. That way we can ensure that we can delight the customer. All right. Now, one important thing, why teams should remain the same. It is fixed in this inverted triangle. Teams should remain the same to ensure that the knowledge of the entire software, the KT, like we say, right? The knowledge stays within the same group of people. It will cost you time if you keep changing the team. It will cost the morale of the team if the team keeps changing, if the team is unstable. Because the same people come together, there's a better synergy. If you remember, one of the important principles was about self-organizing teams. How can you have a bunch of people self-organize? If you keep changing, some members of the team, how will they self-organize? A team needs to come together, bond, understand each other, create synergies. That can only happen if the team remains constant. Everyone gets familiar and comfortable with each other. I always say this, team is made up of people, not of laptops, right? Team is made up of people. Give them time, trust them. They will take care of things. And they will respect you too if you respect them. But if you keep changing them, it is now the Scrum Master and Product Owner also has to keep working with new people. The existing people who may not have changed have to now deal with a new person who has their own way of working, their own schedules, their own quirks. Like, we are all humans after all, right? So keep the team fixed and you will achieve great things. Keep changing the team and great things will be aloof, right? So with that, we come to the end of this particular quick episode. I hope you liked it. If there is any question that you may have, please feel free to ask me. The email is there in the show notes. I am there on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. I will be coming on LinkedIn very soon. So feel free to pour in all of those questions, doubts, any feedback also if you have. I would love to hear from you. I'm not a professional with podcasting for sure. But if you feel that I can make this episode a little more better, then I would love to hear from you on that too. So with that, this is Shishir signing off on the Scrum Call.